Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. My name is Omri Johnson, your host. I hope you're well. Join me as we continue to deconstruct the shortcomings of traditional DEI strategies and co-create a vision for more transformative, human-centered approaches to inclusion. Myself and my esteemed guests will challenge the status quo, dive deep into the reactive, supplemental nature of many DEI initiatives. We'll explore how to reclaim the profound and transformational potential of inclusion as a catalyst for collective growth, empowerment, and organizational change. Season 2 of the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast starts now. Welcome to the Reconstructing Inclusion podcast. I'm Omri Johnson, your host. I'm excited today to have my friend, mentor, I'd say big brother, just you name it, Howard Ross.
Say family.
Family, yes, absolutely. Howard and I have known each other a long time. And actually, for those that know this, and I've written some things about this, Howard brought me into the space. I was outside the space, still kind of in this public health world, and Howard brought me into the world of DEI. So I'm excited to have you here today, Howard. And we're going to jump right in. Welcome.
Oh, it's good to be with you always.
Likewise. So before we have our full conversation, I always ask a favorite song or movie that you go to over and over again.
That's an easy one for me. Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. It's been my personal theme song for almost 50 years. And wow. When I'm feeling sort of blue, or when I'm feeling lazy, or just kind of run down and I need to get myself some energy, I can put that in, go into a room by myself and shout along with it. And like my mood changes overnight. But there's also something about it, that theme of freedom and that theme of, taking on life with that kind of gusto that I really love about it. Yeah.
So now the second question is book or person that has influenced or inspired you professionally or personally in your life or career journey?
I would say that I would choose, these faces you see behind me all could answer that. It's my kids get on me because they always say, what do you think is the best, this, the best? And I'm just not good at that. I'm not good at choosing the GOAT. There's so many great people. I mean, the woman right above my head there, Nancy Neal, was somebody who, when I was very young, coming out of college and was teaching, she was my principal of the school, and she taught me so much about life. James Baldwin, when I read The Fire Next Time in probably 1966 or something like that. It's like, this middle-class Jewish kid reads this thing, and it was like all of a sudden the world looked different. And then on the other side of me, Dr. Johnetta Cole, who, as you know, has been a dear friend, mentor, and partner in my work for many years. So there are just so many people out there who inspired me.
A lot of those people have inspired me too. And Dr. Cole was the president of Spelman when I was at Morehouse. Mm-hmm. So I got to know her. I know her son. We were really good friends in college. Yeah. So he's a human that probably inspired me and influenced me, both the fun stuff and the intellectual stuff. I'll put it like that. We had a lot of both.
That's right. The best kind of friends you can have. You can go both ways, right?
Absolutely. So Howard, now you obviously been at this for a while. Can you share your background with our audience, who you are, parallel, and what you are continue to seek to create in the world?
Sure. Let me, at 74, I have to cut this a little short, or else we'll take a little time talking about this. So I grew up in a middle-class Jewish home, born in 1951. So in the shadow of the war, my family suffered enormous loss in the Holocaust. We know 43 members of our family died in 2 days in 1942, August 1942. And so it was there as an omnipresent kind of thing, what had happened in the war, but it also was kind of not talked about, and so it was in the whispers, but it became very, very influential in my generation, my family, my personal family. my immediate family rather. My older sister became one of our nation's leading immigration lawyers. She's retired now. My younger sister is Marion Wright Edelman's fundraiser for 15 years at the Children's Defense Fund and has done work with social justice organizations all over the world. I first became a teacher working with very young children in a predominantly low-income African-American community in Kensington, Maryland. And then when I tripled the size of the program in a year and found out that nothing that I knew about managing people worked anymore, I began to study OD work and organizational change. And so that led me to going into consulting at some point after spending a couple of years working in a hospital doing staff development work. And then I had gotten involved in civil rights when I was maybe 15 or 16. And so the two things came together in the early 80s when the diversity movement in businesses started and kind of took off from there. Got involved in doing that work in around 1985, I think is when I got paid for the first diversity workshop that I did. And then have been doing that ever since. Started as, Cook Ross, which I was grateful to have you join me in for a while. And Cook Ross grew to be about 50 people. I started to get involved in work on unconscious bias back about 20 years ago now, before it became kind of the it thing. And as you know, it sort of became my label for a while, even though I tried to get out of it. At some point it was pigeonholed. There were lots of other things I was interested in. But so that's where it led to the books I've written. And then just to kind of bring it to now, the last book I wrote, Our Search for Belonging, really came out of the research for bias. I kept finding this thing called belonging, which I always thought of as a sort of touchy-feely thing, oh, gee, you want to belong sort of thing. But I realized it's actually a very rigorous psychological concept, and there's a lot of study being done about it all over the world. And so since that time, I sold the company in 2018, and since that time, I've been working on select projects here and there relative to any of those issues. And I'm still, I'm rewired, not retired, I like to say. I still do.
That needs to be a podcast, Howard. Rewired, not retired. I love it.
That's not a bad idea, actually.
No, it's great. Because I think it's with the boomers, I think it's pretty typical. And I listen to it because I'll be there not too long from now.
Right.
So you've been at this, and you just explained you've been at this for decades, this so-called DEI work.
Right.
We're having a time right now in the space. How's this pushback different than previous challenges the field has faced?
Well, I think we have to look at, anything as because you're a systems thinker, and it's one of the reasons you and I, connect so deeply is because we both think beyond this specific instance and more to the system. I think we have to put it in the context of the broader system we're in. We're in this tribal circumstance right now. We've gone from, when in the book, I say we've gone from a bell curve society where most people are kind of in the middle and on one side or the other, but sort of on the moderate side. And I would agree or disagree with you on an issue orientation, so it's like, I might agree with you on civil rights, but disagree with you on foreign policy, but agree with you on welfare, but disagree with you on this, and all of these and so you had these alliances famously, Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch combined on education reform, McCain-Feingold, the most conservative and liberal people coming together because on an issues basis, you could do that. But what's happened now is we've shifted from that bell curve society to a dumbbell curve society where everything's on the end and nothing's in the middle. And the notion of working with somebody across the aisle is considered pretty much by both sides to be betrayal. And so once you've established these two tribes, all of a sudden are looking at issues moves from being, okay, what's the best way to do this to either orness. It's a little bit like you and I met through, as you said, through healthcare. You look at the relationship between sort of what we might call alternative healthcare, things like acupuncture and, functional medicine and all these kinds of things versus more traditional allopathic healthcare, right? And, anybody who's got a half a brain would choose the best from both, right? Choose the best from both. And yet we saw, and particularly boldly with the whole issue about the COVID vaccine, it gets right into this tribal thing, either or, and even affected by the politics of it. It even became political in that regard. So having said that context, that broader tribal context is probably as strong right now in our culture. It's undoubtedly probably stronger at any time since the Civil War. So once you've established that, then any idea gets tribalized. So then we take the experience of the work that's been done around diversity and equity and inclusion over these decades, and you and I, and I'm sure we'll get to talking about this. Some of it's been incredibly great work that has been made a huge difference and supported people in numerous ways. And some of it has been kind of half-cocked and crazy and over the top and not very helpful.
Yeah.
Both are true, just like every single professional field that exists. Now, that being said, what's happened here is that you've got one particular side that chose to use this as a way to generate particular opposition to the other side. So Christopher Rufo, who's the guy who started all this stuff, but as you know, by attacking me with a Wall Street Journal article and all this kind of stuff for giving a town hall meeting, he says, what we need to do is we need to think of everything bad we can think of and pin it on this. At first it was critical race theory, then it became DEI, right? So of course, airplanes fall out of the sky, it's DEI. Bridges fall, it's DEI. So you've got this strange mixture. You know what it reminds me of? You remember many years ago, now some of our listeners won't know about this, but when Marion Barry was the mayor of Washington, D.C., and he got busted for doing fraud, right? And for those who don't know, Marion Barry was a very popular mayor of the city, and he got caught in a hotel room by a sting, smoking crack with a woman. And there was all this, debate. Was this a guy who was like arrogant and thought he was above the law, or was this targeting of Black leaders, right? And William Raspberry, who was a brilliant columnist for the Washington Post, African-American columnist for the Washington Post, wrote a column, and he said, so here's the conversation. Is it this or that? And he said, yes, it's both. Both things are happening. And I think that's very analogous to what's going on. Have there been missteps in the diversity, equity, and inclusion world? Of course, there have been missteps. We've been trying to figure out, sometimes people's own stuff gets in the way. Sometimes people have their own pain points that they can't resolve except by making that person out in front of them wrong. All of that stuff's there. And you and I have talked about that, and I'm sure we'll talk more about it. Yeah. However, this is also a terrorist attack against this field for a particular purpose. Because, for example, taking down the pictures of Dr. King in Department of Defense schools has nothing to do with identity stuff. Taking down pictures of Ruth Bader Ginsburg has nothing to do with that. What this is about is a way to push back the progress we've made over these years.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think obviously those pictures could return back in 4 years. Even depending on who gets elected, even if another Republican gets elected, it could change. So that stuff is more, to me, it's cosmetic. And I also believe that a lot of DEI work has been cosmetic instead of transformational or systemic. How can we as practitioners in this space kind of make that distinction? Because you've been in organizations who've been activity after activity after activity, and not really making the kind of change fundamentally, building the skills that people need to, make inclusion normative, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So like the cosmetic is what it is, and people can get outraged. And just like they got outraged when statues were taken down during the Black Lives Matter movement, right? People got outraged about it. And I was like, yeah, it's all cosmetic. Put them back if you want to and spend that cost, but it's all silly. I didn't necessarily agree with it.
I don't fundamentally disagree with you, but I think the language is important here. I think that you have three concepts that get collapsed here. There's what you're calling cosmetic, and then there's what I would call performative, and then there's symbolic. And there are times when symbolism is really important. And the problem is when you don't go anywhere beyond the symbolism, then it's not helpful because it breeds more cynicism. When things are more performative, and that is, it symbolizes something to demonstrate that we're actually moving on it. So we're saying this because we're moving on it, then it becomes more substantive. Now, one of the challenges is that we've had in this space for a long time is that the practitioners have not come from a consistent place. Our practitioners have not come from a consistent place. And that's nobody's fault. There's not like one certification. It's not like you go to medical school and you become a doctor, and you go to this school and you become a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, So people have come from different directions. Some people have come from organizational change, kind of their OD practitioners who really understand how to move organizations forward. And in my experience, people who have that kind of background have been more effective because what they recognize is that this work will always be enrollment work. Always. You can't force people to change the way they think. And this is a lot of the backlash we're getting, is because there have been too much shoving it down people's throats. And that's not because I don't understand the feelings associated with that, the frustration that leads people to do that. I understand the impatience, understand all of that. But you can't grab a plant and yank it up and think that's going to make it grow faster. It just must work. You kill it, right? And the same thing has been true here. And so I think you've had the people who come from that place. You've got people who are activists who really believe the topic as activists, but they don't. And so they've had all the passion and sometimes a deep understanding of the issues, but they haven't necessarily understood the ability to make things happen in the organization. They haven't understood how to be a change agent as opposed to how to be an activist. And they're two different skill sets. You can have both. When I'm out marching, I'm going to be going out to a demonstration tomorrow in my community. We're going to be at our congressman's office, and that will be me as an activist. When I'm working with people in an organization, I'm a change agent. It's a different set of skills. A change agent has to include everybody in order to be effective. And so I think I realize it's sort of a long-winded answer.
No, I think that the distinction is important, Howard, because what we've done is we've collapsed. And most of the conversation that I'm hearing is the collapse of the activism role into organizational life.
Exactly. And particularly post George Floyd.
Exactly. And so it ended up being that activism, and holding a particular ideological, or even you can call it philosophical kind of leaning. Mm-hmm. This is a free country. Everybody could do that. But when it comes into organizations, I haven't found it to be effective.
Yeah.
And so I got it. I understood it. I understood why people felt the way that they felt, but it didn't create a lot of space.
Yeah, and I think that's
what it seems like is being pushed back against. People don't really even know what DEI is for all intents and purposes. They didn't know what diversity management was. They didn't know what DEI was. They definitely don't know what DEI is. So that collapse is what collapsing kind of the domains that you just described around the performative, symbolic. What was the third one?
Cosmetic. That was the third.
Performative, symbolic, cosmetic. So how do we move practitioners? Because it seems like now, the resistance that is going to be activism is absolutely what people should do if they're in opposition.
That's right.
What does that look like now inside of organizations? I mean, obviously organizations are being told you can't do DEI. And they're private organizations. The government can't tell them what to do, but they're scared that they're going to get found out. So how do we move people to understand that the work that oftentimes got co-opted as activism inside of organizations, not productively so, is not the work that needed to be done or needs to be done moving forward? How do we kind of have that different conversation, both with companies and people that consider themselves supporters or practitioners?
Yeah, great question. I mean, first of all, I think we need to slow our roll a bit. The way this has all come out very intentionally, this sort of blitzkrieg approach of, this 500, I think it's 500 now executive orders and all this kind of stuff is designed to have everybody go, Chicken Little, the sky's falling. So we need to stop and breathe for a minute and see what's actually going on. What's actually going on is that, as of the latest poll that I saw about within the last month, 52% of Americans still believe that diversity, equity, inclusion are overwhelmingly positive. 29% think it's overwhelmingly negative, and the rest are sort of uncertain and in between. So what we've got is a minority point of view that's being shoved down the throats of people right now. So we have to understand that, because what that means is that we're actually have a lot more friends out there than we realize, a lot more supporters of this work than we realize. Secondly, I think we have to do it, and I've been saying this for a long, long time. I think what ends up happening to human beings is we have a problem or a challenge that we have to address. We find some way to address that challenge, and at some point our commitment shifts from the the thing we need to address to the way we've chosen to address it. The example I like to use is my friend Jill, my lifelong friend. I've known her since we were 18 years old in California. And she decided a number of years ago she was going to run because she hadn't really taken care of her body. So she was like maybe 50 when she started doing this. She starts running. And then a few years ago, she started to have hip issues. But damn it, she was going to run that marathon. And sure enough, blew out her hip and ended up with a hip replacement, right? So we have to recognize that diversity, equity, and inclusion work was never the goal. It was always a methodology to get to the goal. The goal is to create organizations that have a sense of belonging for everybody, that have a place for everybody to be able to be successful, to do their best, to have opportunity, all those things we've talked about. And a lot of the very good work around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I like to think that some of the work I've done, that you've done, that a lot of other wonderful practitioners out there have done, have contributed to that. And there's some that have been problematic. So I think we need to look at that in context, first of all. I think second of all, we need to recognize that each circumstance is very different. And one of the challenges that one of the things I've been saying to a lot of practitioners now is don't buy into these lists of here's a good company and here's a bad company necessarily, without doing a lot of homework, because there are a lot of people who I'm talking to now, CDOs, chief diversity officers of a lot of major corporations, whose corporations are feeling the push, but still want to try to do the work. And the way they're doing that is by lowering their profile. So they're keeping their heads down a bit so that they can keep doing the work. But if people outside start saying, well, you're bailing, you're going to bring a lot of attention to that. Yeah. Then it screws it up. So I think we have to be really careful to look at what are the things that we can do. There's always something you can do. If the door's locked, you look for the open windows.
Right.
Well, there's still things we can do around team development, about communication, about effective leadership, all of these things which contribute to more diverse, equitable, and inclusive organizations without necessarily being specifically about DE&I. And I think some of that work, when the concepts of equality and these kinds of things were embedded into things like leadership work, were a lot more effective. I remember you and I did a project in Georgia together where we did exactly that. It was all embedded in the notion of inclusive leadership, and it was incredibly effective in that organization. We worked with them for a few years, and I talked to them 10 years later, and it was still having an impact. Yeah. So,
I mean, it's that sustainable piece, Howard, that just quite honestly, and we've had this conversation too. I've probably been a bigger naysayer about my own space than most people have. And I've done it out of love, kind of like, when I was young and I was training, my dad said, "You're not running enough."
That's right.
And I was like, "What do you mean? I ran this." And I wasn't, because I wasn't in good enough shape. When I started running, I understood what he said, right? Now, what are we saying to practitioners? You said slow your roll, but what else? For those that, some of them got into the DEI space out of passion. Some of them got out of, they felt like they could do something, make something at the same time. Others got in because they felt like they could make something. When I say make, I mean money.
Well, yeah. I mean,
how do you kind of move people into what do we need to start building capacity-wise, capability-wise for practitioners and people who are kind of see themselves as being able to do this work effectively? What do they need to be doing differently than what we've seen before?
Yeah, again, good question. I mean, one of the challenges is there's a lot of righteousness in the space. Like, what I mean by righteousness is being right. Like, my position is not just different than yours, not just better than yours, it's more holy than yours. And one can believe that on a personal level. Certainly we all believe that our values are the correct values or the right values. But when we come across like anybody who disagrees with me is the opposite, is the devil, then it's really problematic. And the challenge in this space is that there are people who are promoting this anti-DEI, this anti-woke message, who are not, what's the word they use? They're not good faith players. They're actually intentionally trying to take apart the social safety net. We see what Musk is doing. This is all about destroying progress and putting people, quote, back in their place. I mean, When you talk about making America great again, when was America ever great for Black people, Omri?
I mean, that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
but there have been times where America's been better for Black people than it is today.
Right.
Let's put it like
It's
that.
certainly better, but I would never say great, you know. But in any case, my point is.
I mean, we could say the same thing for poor people. We could say the same thing for a lot of people who have been kind of at the particular rung of the economic space, you know.
Right. But I think but my point is, I think it's a movement to go back to something that was based on a particular identity group's needs. And that's one of the reasons why the identity thing comes up. So the challenge is that as practitioners, we're acting like that 29% I was talking about is actually 75%. And there are a whole lot of folks out there, even folks who voted for Trump, who don't really like what he's doing and don't agree with a lot of this stuff. They voted for him. I talked to one person about it. He said, look, I held my nose and voted for him, but I couldn't go, but I don't agree with everything he does. I think some of his stuff is awful, you know. Now, we could talk about who's prioritizing what issues. For me, those values are more important than a particular policy issue, but for somebody else, those policy issues are more important. Right. But I do think that this notion of when Hillary Clinton said that half of his followers were unredeemables and what was deplorables and unredeemables, it was one of the stupidest things any politician's ever said, but it doesn't mean she wasn't right. I mean, there's certain.
Wait. You need to explain that to the audience.
We know that there's a certain part of that group that is, you know, are white supremacists, they're racist, overt racists, they're misogynists. There are people in that group who are like that, but it's not everybody. And there are an awful lot of people who find themselves in this ground between these two sides, and I have to choose. And I don't relate to either one of them, really. I want to relate. So those are the people that practitioners need to be reaching out to. We need to ask them. I noticed that you said something negative about DEI. Can you tell me what you think DEI it is? A lot more questions, a lot more understanding where people's concerns are coming from. What aspects of the work that we're doing did you find problematic? Well, this, and this. I say, great. So if we did it this way, would you be comfortable with it? Sure. Okay, great. So let's do it that way. You know, so the fact that it's all being thrown into this bucket for the purpose of eliminating it for political reasons doesn't have to influence our behavior. I'm sorry, just to complete the thought. One could argue that the most important role that we have as people who are committed to diversity, equality, equity, inclusion, all these kinds of things, is to be the third chair, is to be the kind of people who can bring these voices together to the degree that it's possible. Now, you can't reach everybody. You know, I recently had a conversation with somebody I'd had a long back and forth with for many years, a conservative guy, and I finally had to say, I just can't do this anymore because it just got to be, it was starting to get personal and I didn't want to go there, right? Yeah. And look, I want nothing but the best for you and your family, but we got to stop this, right? But there are still people you can talk to. And I think we need to find whoever we can talk to, particularly in our organizations.
You mentioned a barbell kind of strategy versus a bell curve.
I think dumbbell.
Dumbbell, sorry. And I remember I used dumbbell because I am a big fan of Nassim Taleb, and he talks about having a dumbbell or barbell strategy where you kind of are, you know, have most of your thing here, but you do something big over here to actually say it's a portfolio. You have most of your stuff in relatively conservative investments, and then you have some part of it that's huge and could blow up and make you a lot of money. And if you lose it, it won't kill you, right? And I'm thinking about right now in the DEI space, it feels like there was a big asymmetry since George Floyd, where the one side was very much social justice, civil rights. We're going to get you. We're going to get back everything that you took from us white guys, even the Jewish ones. They didn't make any distinctions between anybody.
White or liberals are worse than overt racists. You know, no, liberals are not worse than overt racists. I'm sorry.
Like things like that were coming up, and there was very little focus on kind of, with the exception of people kind of going on and on about structural racism, but there was very few things that were put in place to deal with organizational systems and structures to begin to wire them for inclusion to be normative. How do we start moving back there for practitioners? You said a little bit of kind of being able to shoulder there or take the dissent on and be more curious with people rather than immediately pigeonholing them. What else, Howard? Because that asymmetry was pretty pronounced to the point where I've told you, anytime I pushed back on it, even practitioners that knew I'd been doing this work as long as I have went after me like I didn't know what I was talking about. Like, Omri is anti-DEI. And I was like, why would I be anti-DEI when I have a
Well, it's
firm
like
and I have a book? And well, come on.
accuse me of being
Yeah,
hating white people. It's
right.
just kind
Exactly.
of
That's what I'm saying, Howard. Like, think about how do we, for those who, because not everybody, some people are still like, they're going after all the black people. I was like, right now, everybody's going to be harmed by a lot of the things that are coming out of the Doge, right?
well,
So this
again,
isn't about just black people. Doesn't mean that there are some things that are going to be harmed,
well, I was going to
as
say it's
oftentimes,
both end. See, this is
yeah.
it's again, it's yes, they are specifically going against race, and yes, there are a lot of other people. I mean, my friend who found out yesterday that he's losing his job because a government contract that was supposed to be for 2 more years got cut is a 59-year-old white guy. So so there are other people who are going to be affected, but that doesn't mean they haven't gone to race. There's one thing I think that's really important for us to recognize here. I mean, first of all, I would say that the period of time you're talking about post George Floyd was actually a very short period of
It
time,
was. It was.
9 months before the retrenchment started. But I think that there's the other thing to recognize about the frustration folks like you and I and others have had with diversity work not being done systemically enough wasn't I would say even in most cases, wasn't because of the practitioners. It was because the organizations that the practitioners work in were not willing to commit to what it takes to do the work on that level. You and I have worked on projects when we worked together that were culture change projects, right? They weren't DEI projects. They were just about, and that requires, thousands of hours of time and lots of money and stuff to, and it has a huge impact in the long run. You invest that money in the long run, you get it back tenfold if you do it well, right? But for a lot of DE&I practitioners, it was everything that they were able to do to get a diversity training, Black History Month celebration, and International Food Day in the cafeteria in their organization. And their leader said, well, that's as much as we can afford this year. And so people tried to do the best they could in a lot of cases, but just couldn't get the kind of permission to do the things they were going to do it. And a lot of what happened in the performative work or the symbolic work that came out of post George Floyd was very much that. We stand for Black Lives Matter. We're signing this agreement, all this kind of stuff. And they made all these bold stands. And then they were presented with how much it was going to cost to do that. And they said, no, we could do 1/10 of that. Right. So I do think that, with that, now where we as practitioners are accountable in that measure is that we've got to do a better job of explaining to people why. So many practitioners who I talk to say, I'm so sick of telling people the business case. It's like my response is, yeah, I'm sick of it too. Do it anyway. People always have to hear the business case.
And it has to be the business case for your company, not some generic one, because it doesn't work.
My people, my staff, my customers. And when one has that kind of a mindset, then I come to the leadership team and I say, look, here's what I'm trying to do. Here's the effect it's going to have that I'm anticipating it's going to have. Here's where it's going to generate more revenue for us. And in order to get that revenue, here's the investment that I'd like you to make. Now, that's something that people can look at and say, okay, let me make that choice if I could do that. But one of the challenges is, and this gets back to the righteousness, like I had somebody I talked to recently. This was before all this, the latest flavor of this stuff, maybe a couple of years ago. And they said, yeah, our program's being cut. Their commitment to diversity is really waiting. I said, well, tell me what's going on. I said, well, we told we had to make an 8% cut in our budget. Okay. I said, what's going on in the organization? Well, the whole organization's in trouble. Everybody across the board is making 10% cuts. Right. I said, dude, in other words, what they're saying is diversity is more valuable than everything else. They're saying you only do 8%. And the person, you never thought of it that way. I mean, it's that kind of stuff that we get so attached and we're not being strategic. As you know, I was trained by Saul Alinsky, and Alinsky used to say, use your emotion, use your passion, use your upset, your anger, all that stuff to motivate you energetically, but you think your strategy. You don't feel your strategy. You think your strategy, right? And I think too often people are coming from emotion. So rather than, like a good example is right now, the whole war on words, right? There are people who say, we want to, especially the E, everybody wants to get rid of equity, So the people, I'm not going to give up my word. It's like, this is my, hell, what I say, you call it Eleanor for all I care. I don't give a damn what you call it. It's like, find a way to keep doing the work. It's like an old teacher of mine used to say, when you go fishing, what the fish likes to eat, not what you like to eat.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the one worry I had when SHRM decided to let go of the E
Yeah.
from their efforts. And I was like, some of my colleagues went ballistic. And I was like, did you see what else SHRM did? SHRM started focusing on civility. What do we need right now more than pretty much anything is companies are facing the potential for gross levels of incivility. And I think you don't have to like what SHRM did, but SHRM was skating to where the puck was going.
Not only that, and because I know people who work there, that the commitment is still there, and Johnny Taylor still has a commitment. I mean, he is more on the moderate side than a lot of people,
Sure.
but he still has a commitment for it. But I had the same reaction. I was asked to. I was I'm part of the board of an organization I helped start in space a number of years ago, and it was asked to write a response to that, like this. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I said the response should be, everybody has got to find in their organization what's the appropriate language to use that will enroll people in their organization.
Exactly.
Taylor runs an organization that's HR professionals. It's not diversity professionals. He's got people across the span politically. He's got to deal with an organization that has all kinds of companies in it. And so if he's got something that's a trigger that's going to drive half of the people away, he's not serving his goal. If he can get people to continue doing the work by turning it into DI and C or whatever they decided to land on, as far as I'm concerned, if he wants to keep doing the work that way, God bless him. Let's keep moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because that was, I didn't fully understand it. And maybe I was like, well, maybe I've been in Europe too long. And I just didn't get it. But that's fantastic. So Howard, I'm going to switch a bit. You've shared with us that, this political narrative is incomplete. Most people in the country support the principles of DEI.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people are focused more on the ideology than the principles. And I think you've explained that, like, the principles are firm in what we're really trying to create. When you wrote the first publication of Everyday Bias, you had written another book, and then you went into the bias work, which I know was interesting because I started with the bias work with you when I first came in like 03, 04. But Everyday Bias was your second book. Right?
Diversity actually had one whole third of the book was introducing the whole concept of unconscious.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then so second, they said, we want more of this. And so the publisher.
I see. So you're going back to another version or third edition of Everyday Bias.
Yeah.
What's going to be different, and why is it important now?
Well, the main reason is because my son Jake is going to co-write it with me. So that's because the truth is at this stage of my career, I'm not sure if I would have taken it on, because I've really got nothing to accomplish with it anymore. I've been very blessed with that. All three of my books have done really well, and I feel very proud of them. But all kidding aside, you've known Jake since he was very little, of course. I think you met him when he was 10 years old, probably. He's now a very accomplished professional. He's got his master's degree in positive psychology from University of Pennsylvania, and he's working in AI. And so when Roman and Littlefield reached out to me to do another version of the book, my first response was, I'm not sure. And then I talked to Jake, and Jake has been finding all this amazing research on how AI and social media and other technologies are influenced by bias, how they can both sustain and help alleviate bias. And so we decided that would be a great place to take the book. So we're going to do the book. So that's the main thing. Obviously, some of the research will be updated throughout the book and everything, because this, I think, version 2 was in, 2020 or 2021. I did version 2. So there's been a lot going on in the last 4 or 5 years, and there's a lot more research out there. But the big shift will be to look at it, how does it apply to the modern world? And then also there'll be a section to look at how bias is impacting this tribalism we're talking about. It's a way of our creating a culture of belonging.
So Howard, what gives you hope about the future of this work? You've been at it a long time. There's not very many people that can look back to see what's evolved like you can. I mean, you're taking really good care of yourself. Not everybody that's doing this work is still with us, some for reasons that weren't just about their health. Where do you see from where you started to what the future looks like? What gives you hope about the work of DEI for the future?
Well, first of all, I'm sort of an eternal optimist. I remember years ago, somebody who said, maybe it was Churchill or somebody who said, so you're really optimistic about this? And the response was, what other choice is there? But I do think that the perspective of age is really helpful for me here. I do believe, and you can't help, if you're, as you know, I'm a historian by training. If you really are a historian, if you do look at history, you can't help but believe the statement that the arc of history leads bends towards justice. Dr. King's famous statement about that, because it's true. I mean, with everything that's going on, this is still the best time in the history of the planet relative to equality and things like that. Now, that doesn't mean we still have a long way to go, but it's never been a straight path. It's always been 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And the retrenchment is part of it. And we know even in history, we look at history over a period of time and we say, wow, there've been some awful things that happened. But Nazi Germany was 12 years. As horrible as it was 12 years out of history. How long this lasts, who knows? This retrenchment is going to be here for a little bit, but it's not going to be forever because the demographics are what they are. I mean, you can try to round up 11 million people, throw them out of the country. It doesn't matter. People are still reproducing faster, right? Staying focused in the long term is really important. I think that I'm very optimistic about some of the young people in space. I just spent some time yesterday on the phone with Dan Eagle, who, used to work with us at Cook Ross, who's got this wonderful organization called Ideas Generation for the younger generation of practitioners, who's got as solid a head on his shoulders as anybody I know. And I could list another 20 people like that, who I personally am very close to. I'm optimistic because I do generally, even with everything that's going on, believe in that people have goodness in them. That comes from my more spiritual side. It doesn't mean they can always find it. There are people who are really harmed. I can even look at Trump sometimes and feel compassion for a guy who grew up with a father who was apparently worse than he is. And that was how he learned to survive. And it's sad. It doesn't mean it's like, and I don't say this to be snarky, it's kind of like a rabid dog. You could say the dog's sick, but he's still dangerous, right? So you can have compassion, but still have to protect yourself from somebody. But I think that what my ultimate optimism comes from is the historical perspective and knowing that this is the right direction for history to go in. Without any doubt, that equality and equality of opportunity and equality of treatment of people is in fact the way that we need to go historically. And that when we look, let's just look real quickly at American history. 1863 emancipation comes, right? It doesn't actually happen until 1865. And then we have this period of Reconstruction. Then Reconstruction ends and the Klan comes in, right? And then we have that period for a while. And then World War I comes and a lot of Black soldiers go and they make money and they bring it back. And so we see Black Wall Street and all this stuff. And then the Red Summers come in of 1920, 1920, and 21, right? And then once again, we build up and post World War II, you got that. And then Brown versus Board and the Klan comes back. I mean, this has been the path of history, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And so it's important for us to recognize that this is a retrenchment. It's not stopping anything. It's just a retrenchment. And if we hold that space and we sit back and say, okay, let me read the tea leaves. Let me see what's going on around me. Let me choose the appropriate actions for now and look for the opportunity to start moving forward again. And I think that that's the attitude that's going to help us. And I think there are a lot of people out there who, past their initial shock, are dealing with that. Now, there are a lot of people in our space, the diversity, equity, inclusion space, who are personally challenged right now. They're worried about making a living. They're worried about paying their rent. They're worrying about their companies going under and all that kind of stuff. And so that's Maslow's hierarchy. That's at the lowest levels. And so that's going to take over. And one of the things I've been doing, I spend a lot of time on the phone coaching people like that. And one of the things I keep saying to people is just keep expanding your offer. Look what else you can offer. What else is there? One of the things, for example, I have a dear friend who has been teaching programs on compassion in action at Stanford University. Actually, Neelama. You've met Neelama. And she's been doing this at Stanford for years. So she and I now are putting together something where we're going to offer it to some organizations. Let's talk about compassion and empathy. Because what better time to talk about compassion and empathy than now? That's not DE&I work in any way, shape, or form. It's not DE&I work, but it will support people in relaxing these oppositional points of view and hopefully be able to listen to each other better. So I am optimistic that there are things we could do. And I'm also really worried about the people who will be damaged during this period and who will be harmed and even die as a result of some of what's going on.
So thank you, Howard. Is there anything else that I should have asked you or that you'd like to add to our dialogue?
Gosh, there's so many. You and I could sit and talk for 3 days and never run out of stuff to talk about, bro. So it says, I think that if there's a last thought that I'd want to leave people with is whichever end of this tribal structure you feel yourself pulled towards is to lean towards the middle. Not lean towards the middle in terms of changing your points of view or your values or the policies you believe in. That's Everybody's got that right. But lean towards the middle in terms of searching for the humanity in people on the other side. Even if you decide, as I did with this guy, I know he's a good man. I know he's not an evil person. I just realized it wasn't constructive for us to talk about this stuff anymore. I'll still send him a birthday note. I'll still send him a happy holidays note, But remembering that that humanity is there is so important, that because this is what happens. What happens is we begin to dehumanize people. I remember when I bought the farm that I live on. When I bought the farm I'm living on, I never lived out in the rural area. I'd always lived in the suburbs or city. And I was standing at the fence with my neighbor Buck, who I think you even met one time, and he had some cows that we were letting him use our land because we have more land than him. It just gave him a chance to have his cows. So we're sitting at the fence, I kind of looking at cows. I said, "What are their names, Buck?" And he says, "You don't name them. They're beef cattle." And I said, "What does that have to do with it?" And he says, "You don't name things you're going to eat." He said once his daughter raised this cow, this prize winning cow that belonged to 4-H. And it was like the thing was worth thousands of dollars. And he said, "I couldn't kill the damn thing because it was my daughter's pet." Right. So I think similarly, the more we know each other for who we are, the less we treat each other like what we are. The more we know each other as our neighbor, Paul, who voted for Trump, as opposed to a Trumpist. Just like in the disability community, people taught us it's better to talk about people as people who are disabled rather than disabled people, because once you call them disabled people, that becomes their identity. But if you call them people who are disabled, then the identity centers on their personhood. And I think very similarly, I try to remember that this is a person who voted for Trump. It's not a Trumpist. This is a person who voted for such and such, So I think all of those things are really important for each of us to do, and to recognize that right now, being right about the positions is less important than healing this divide. Right now, I find myself moving towards moderation in the people who I'm supporting, not because my politics have changed or my positions have changed. They're still as strong as they've ever been. But because I think right now our priority needs to be to heal this divide so that we can talk to each other again, be willing to have Thanksgiving dinner with our family members.
Howard, that's beautiful. I would sum that up as we need to be facing who we are, not what we are. That we need to know that rightness has never transformed anything. And we need to know that as we face the sinner, we always have to choose humanity. Howard Ross, thank you. Always a pleasure. And folks, love to hear what your thoughts are. Love to hear always from you about where can we go next? And do we need to bring Howard back? I hope so. Make it a great day. Peace.
Love you, brother.
If you are committed or simply a little bit curious about how to make DEI accessible to everyone, actionable, that is, unambiguously prioritized and sustainable, aligned with personal and organizational purpose, hit the subscribe button. Make it a great day. Peace.